reluctant.
And here we go.
Hello, everybody. And for the third time without a mishap, starting in German, as we have decided that we quit this not to irritate our most English-speaking audience. And we are so lucky today. We are so lucky to have Nicole France again with us. And not only smiling like, I would say, Osram, here speaking for Germany, bright, shining, smiling, like the real life. She is in a new role, and we are so excited to learn how the transformation from an analyst, female, to an evangelist, female, without these Flügel,
wings.
Yeah?
I don't have a halo either, so
on the halo we can work. Trust me, we are used to do the technical tricks, but honest, it is for me fascinating. And Thomas was so kind to place that question. So, how is the feeling, and what motivated you to take that opportunity for yourself and go for it?
Go for it. That's a good question. It was a whole bunch of things. I mean, I have to say, I love the analyst job. As you guys know, I started early in my career as an analyst. I did a bunch of other things, and then I went back to being an analyst. And I enjoyed it at least as much the second time around as I did the first. But I've also learned about myself that it's one thing to be in this world where most of what you do is observing and absorbing and synthesizing and thinking and trying to communicate something that makes sense of the world. It's a really fun and interesting job, but it's very intellectual. And the downside of that is that you sort of miss an opportunity to put that to practical use. So for me, the opportunity to go into this role as evangelist at Contentfuls was really appealing for a whole bunch of reasons. One is that it's an area I feel very strongly about because I've basically always been a content person throughout my career, and we can talk more about that. It was an opportunity to take all this thinking that I've been doing and to apply it to a specific area and really a business that's trying to grow and make a mark in the world. So having the opportunity to sort of think and do at the same time was really very appealing. And that to me is a lot about the evangelist role in general. But it didn't hurt that I had a great opportunity to go and work with someone who I think is just fantastic. And Thomas, I don't need to sing Dina's praises because I know you can do that on your own as well. But working for someone who I really admire and I knew I would learn from, and honestly, in a team and in a company that is full of really smart, capable people who take what they do seriously, but don't take themselves too seriously. So it's honestly a really fun and challenging environment that I'm thoroughly enjoying so far.
That sounds really fun. And
wonderful.
Who is the person who is motivating you in such a way that you say the learning perspective and somebody who is even tickling your enthusiasm again?
So it's Dina Apostolou, who's my boss, who I know many of you know quite well. But it's really a great team. We've got Bridget Perry, who is our CMO, Steve Smith, who's our CEO. We've got a really fantastic group of people. The two founders are still part of the company and very active. And we're hiring like crazy. So we've got a bunch of new people coming on board as well, and a bunch of different parts of the business. And I've got to say, I have yet to find someone I don't find to be something of an inspiration to work with. So I feel incredibly lucky. I hope that continues to remain true for a very long time to come. But it's
fantastic.
It's remarkable. It really is.
Yeah.
What brought you to Contentfuls in the first instance?
And what are they doing?
Well, here we are.
Good question, Ralph.
That is the crux of it. I think what we are known as currently is a content management system, a headless one at that. And I can talk a little bit about what that means. Really, what we're trying to do is solve the challenge that companies increasingly have in working across all of these different modes of interaction and engagement with customers to ensure that those interactions are consistent and consistently good. And really what that ultimately comes down to is content. It's kind of interesting. I don't know about you guys. I've always considered content as a term to be somewhat problematic. And I haven't really changed my view since I moved to Contentful. I think that the problem with content as a term is that it's kind of everything and nothing at the same time. So it's an incredibly broad category of stuff. And you can talk to some people about content and they consider it the subject line of an email that you're A/B testing. You can talk to other people about content and it's the substance of what you're actually trying to say to the world. And I tend to be a little bit more in the latter camp, although the former is absolutely part of content as well. So I think as we think about what we do as a company, what we're also trying to think about is how we shape the conversation and understanding of what content actually is. Because I'd argue content is the embodiment of everything you're trying to communicate to the world as a business, from the very high level things like brand promise and value propositions, all the way through to the smallest, most transactional kinds of interactions that you have with the customer or anyone else.
Yeah, I think we would agree with that. And it's weird that content can be so many specific glowing things, but you put it in one bucket and say, this is content. The same way that data can refer to any number of things that will highlight a problem or lead to new information. But data is the other bucket. You've got content and data, and never the two shall mix. But there is so much individuality in both of them. And it's in common talk, we just miss that very often.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's interesting. And this is actually a conversation Dina and I had pretty early on. It's about the parallels between content and data as well, because they are quite distinct, but they have a very strong interrelationship. There are a lot of parallels in terms of how much of it you have, all the different places where it is, how you try to manage it and make sense of all of it, how you try to use it effectively. I mean, these are challenges in both areas. There's also, a real reason to combine the two, right? If you think about things like everybody's favorite topic of the day, personalization, you can't really do that without both of them, So you need data to tell you about your customers, about behavioral patterns, about the things that really matter that help to give some context. And that's quantitative data, but also qualitative insights about customers as well. I think we can consider that data. And then you need the content also. So you have to understand what you're going to play to whom in what context, and hopefully with some sense of why. So these things have a very, very important interrelationship on a bunch of different levels.
And with that, just pulled up Merriam-Webster, so the dictionary, just to get a gist of what
not the Oxford.
My feeling about it is. So the first thing that I associate with content is that it is contained. So it's a filler for some bucket. So which is...
I was right.
As usual, Marshall.
Two great minds, right? Thinking alike and the kind, So it's a filler, So in contrast to what Marshall said, so the second thing that comes into my mind is actually information. And this is what it should be. So it should be a carrier of information. Insofar, I have a similar feeling that the word is not the best of all possible choices as you have. What we need to deal with, right? So, well, the secret then is of a CMS vendor then probably is to convert content into something valuable, into information, right, for the audience. So, and this is probably where also you think the value is, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And I think where it becomes really valuable is in two ways. One is, and this is from several different perspectives here. One is clearly how you use this information, and it comes through in so many different forms. And this is kind of the fun and the challenge of content as well, right? You have words, you have pictures, you have different forms of media, some that are appropriate to specific channels, and some that are much more highly leverageable across different channels. But it's all about what you're trying to convey. And I would argue that it is information. It's also in a sense of feeling as well. You know, what are you trying to convey to your audience, whether it's a customer or anyone else? What do you want them to think? What do you want them to do? What do you want them to feel? You know, and these are the ways that we use content of all different descriptions and varieties. And some of it is really, really big. Some of it is really, really small. I mean, we talk about everything from multimedia advertising campaigns to a button on a website or in an app. You know, I mean, all of these things are ultimately part of this picture. So how do you think about them and how do you manage them? So coming back to the two ways, one is how you use this in terms of engaging with your audience. And the other is, how do you think about and manage that internally? And that's actually a really, really big question. And that's where we're trying to focus and tackle at least as much, probably more even, than how you get the right elements of content into the appropriate context and the right channel, and to do that as easily as possible. So it's really a question of building a system, building a platform, and that's really the direction that we're going in, to not only help you create and manage all of this stuff, but to understand where it is. Because, you know, none of this exists in a vacuum. We're very rarely going into a customer organization that's starting with a blank slate. Occasionally, but you know, most companies have some history. Most companies have tried some stuff out in the past, and there's a lot of stuff that resides in a bunch of different systems. And I think, I don't know, you guys tell me, but I kind of get the sense that we're past the days where anyone has really got the appetite to rip and replace stuff. Like, no, we don't really want to do that. Transition, yes. Rip and replace.
Don't touch it.
Exactly. So
I know exact in which drawer I have hidden my whiskey and all the other nasty stuff. So don't touch it. Such as you have some dead bodies somewhere in a silo, and you know about it, and you do not want in a data cleansing exercise that's at a sudden some of your hidden bodies are appearing and come to life again. Yeah, it's like a zombie culture. So you do not want to have zombies in your company. And on the other side, you would love to be a helper for experience of the employees, making their lives easy, and which was as a not so well structured and not so creative person in what the heck is king and queen content doing for me in sales, in marketing, and in service. Content is king, maybe also queen, but honestly, I wanted to learn a bit from your perspective now, how we can be, because we trust that 2022 is the year of the sales reps. They will have to fix provocation. Like,
well, we'll make it the year of the sales rep. Okay.
The point is, they have to fix it, what the rest has done in automation. And now they are just looking for that crazy stuff with the hyper-personalization or personalization and one-to-one. And they are in trouble to whom to give, at the push of a button, the right piece of content so that he gets delighted, excited, and is buying.
Oh, let's not talk about delight. Let's not talk about customer delight. That's a different subject.
This is the fresh work topics. Okay. So we go for another one. Let's get them excited and happy.
Yeah, because you're meeting the need in the moment, right?
Yes.
Which is the key thing. It's a really tricky question, and I think it comes down to, in a lot of ways, how sophisticated you are as a business in the ways you try to do that. Because there are some relatively simple and straightforward ways of doing that. And it's about, having a more consistent customer base, maybe a narrower set of offerings that you're selling. And in those cases, understanding that context and anticipating what your audience wants is a lot more straightforward. As soon as you start getting into a really large and complex business, this becomes an extremely sophisticated challenge, because there are so many different variables that are going to determine what that context is. And I think before we get into anything like individual level personalization, and I'm very happy to debate whether that actually even makes sense in a lot of contexts at all, I think the question then becomes, how do you narrow down what is really meaningful and matters in a given context, whether it's in, a sales kind of context or a commerce context, whether it's a website or an app, whether it's a customer service type of engagement or any other type of inquiry. The question really becomes, how well can you understand and anticipate what the context is for the customer, and use that as a way of driving what is an appropriate response? And when I say response, I mean, that could be anything. That could be everything from, the banner that shows up on the website when you go, that might be different for you, Ralph, than it is for me, based on some set of parameters, right? All the way through to what is the actual conversation that you're having with a customer service agent, where they know something about what is going on with you and what your relationship with that organization actually is. So these become some really interesting and important questions. And I think there are many layers to trying to solve that and address it in a really effective way. Ultimately, it's about things like managing complexity. It's about how to create a kind of structure and order that helps to minimize the amount of stuff that you have to manage and the number of variables that you ultimately have to address in order to get to that context as quickly as possible. And there are a lot of different ways of doing that. I mean, we talked about the relationship between data and content before. There's a tremendous amount that's defined by the data that helps to drive that context. There's also a lot that goes into how you plan and organize content. We'll use it, even though it's a slightly problematic term, in order to present what's appropriate for that context. And that comes down to some really hard thinking about modeling, for example, about understanding context, about understanding customer journeys, and connecting all of these things together in a way that makes sense for what you present to customers, but also that makes sense for the people who are trying to build and manage the stuff that goes into those relationships.
Is it possible to have one content management system? I wonder this because I was thinking the other day, as we were working our way up to doing this session, from my point of view, because I come from a writing and journalism background, the content management system is where you create and manage articles and how you post them to a site. For other cases, you have things like a knowledge management database, where the content is the information that either goes into the self-help system or the customer service, guided help, or it can be contract lifecycle management. And they're all very different kinds of content, but they're all content. Can they be managed in one place?
It's an excellent question, and it's one we're actually trying to answer yes to, and we are in a lot of cases. So a few thoughts on how we're doing that. One is, to your point, Marshall, about what goes into the system and what that looks like. I've talked a lot about how, as Contentful, we're helping customers, and this whole idea of headless, that's really API first, API driven, is helping to tackle the way we are able to present content across channels, all kinds of different channels, without having to have a separate system to manage the content that goes into each of those. So that's, this is the idea of headless, is that if you think of the head as kind of like the face or the endpoint through which content is presented, I mentioned things like mobile apps or websites or different kinds of websites, kiosks, digital billboards. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Those are sort of those faces, those endpoints, the heads, if you will. The content is really the body. It's what goes into those things. It's the substance that you feed into those things. So by using a headless system, essentially what we're able to do is to separate the content itself from where it gets displayed. So it makes that task of having one system to manage and present that content much, much simpler. There's a corollary to that on what happens internally with the creation, for example, and management and orchestration of all of that content. And what's interesting and what we certainly see is that, you know, we provide interfaces for people creating content to go directly into Contentful and create their content, write it, pull it together, compose the different content elements that are part of that content model. But that doesn't serve everybody's needs. I mean, and I think you and I can both relate, right? I mean, all of us can. We use different kinds of tools that are easy and familiar to us to create things, whether it's writing something or pulling together a presentation or whatever it might be. Yeah. We have interfaces that we are more accustomed to using, that we find easier, that help us with our thought processes to get those out. And I think what we're increasingly seeing is a desire to help create that kind of work environment, that digital workspace, if you will, for the many, many different types of content creators that exist within an organization. Because there are different needs, you know, there are different preferences, there are different teams with different roles creating and shaping content. And so the very things that help us to present content to all those endpoints easily actually also help us to present the right kind of work environment to plug into those digital workspaces that allow different kinds of content creators and editors to have the work environment that's most suitable for them, even though the content is actually going into that content platform, that CMS.
Is it complicated to operate?
In some senses, yes, and in some senses, no. I think what we're really providing, and these are my words, is a sophisticated solution to a really sophisticated set of problems that many companies have. It's not overly simplified, and it's certainly not simplistic, because the customers that we're working with are really trying to do a range of different things, and they're trying to innovate and experiment and evolve. So they need a system that's flexible enough to help them to do that. Having said that, it does make things simpler in a lot of ways, partly because it helps to separate the work of different teams so that they can work independently, but in coordination toward a common objective. So the most simple way of explaining that is, you know, you typically got a digital or a development team that's busy building these digital products, like an app, for example. Okay. And those things have roadmaps, they've got visions, they've got things that are constantly being adapted and changed and improved and tuned. And then there's the content that goes into those things. And what has often happened in you know, other approaches, technology approaches to managing this stuff, is that these two things are really sort of hard-coded together. So it's impossible for someone to make a content change without requiring the direct work of the development team to actually make it happen. So part of what we've been trying to do is to separate those things so the developer teams can continue to do the work that they need to do to build those digital products, but the content teams, the people responsible for the substance that goes into those, actually can work independently. They can make changes because we've created a model that makes clear that you can change what's in the component, and those components can be moved around independently.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, me being not a nerd and being frustrated when I tried to work with LaTeX in the old days. So I out myself as being quite a nerd on some things which I wanted to create. I nearly went crazy in using it. And so I was very curious and flipped around some of your YouTube videos and some of the presentations Contentful has. And first, at a first glance, I had the impression, well, that is not looking so complicated that you should not touch it. it could be I have to find another phrase for it, not my usual one. It is CEO and manager adequate. Yeah,
I think you're right. And I certainly don't want to overcomplicate things, but I think we can very well address some pretty straightforward use cases, for example. I think the key thing is in order to use Contentful effectively, you have to have some technical capability, because otherwise you're going to be missing the real power of our system. So in some cases, we see a lot of organizations where they have agency partners and other services partners that provide the bulk of that capability. But the point is that, because we offer this flexibility, we're really trying to tackle that need of creating a works environment where teams can work independently, as I said, but in coordination. But also, we're really trying to serve this requirement to adapt and change and experiment. And I think if you aren't an organization that's really trying to push the boundaries on some of that, or at least try it as part of your everyday approach to engaging with customers, you're probably missing a big part of the value proposition.
I like that you admit and call out that it requires some expertise. Because a lot of the times, the products that we review and talk about, they're saying it makes the job so easy. Anyone can do this. Forgive me for bringing up no code or low code. A monkey could do it. But you know what? Businesses don't hire monkeys.
Really?
Well, I mean, usually they don't. I've been employed before, so clearly this isn't entirely true.
Marshall.
But you want people who understand the job and understand that it's not, press the button, get the food pellet. So,
this is to me one of the really fascinating aspects of working with our customers and seeing how they're using Contentful to do what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Because there is absolutely a huge movement to use this platform to make things simpler for other parts of the organization. And what I mean by that is take away the pain of the mundane stuff of making it happen. So make the execution actually really, really easy and straightforward, so that those teams are freed up to think more about the stuff that actually has a lot of business value.
Yeah,
so
don't make them.
So let me give you an example. And this often requires integrating other tools, right? Which is part of the point. So we're saying there's so much that you can do with this. There's so much that companies are trying to accomplish that we aren't going to limit that to only the tool set that we can deliver directly. So we've actually invested in a lot and continue to invest a lot in building this ecosystem and having a lot of technology and service partners to help our customers make use of this more effectively. So there's a great partner that we have, Ninetailed, that helps to do some personalization stuff. One of the things that they do is they allow you to take a bunch of the different content elements and put it into, say, a promotional offering. So, let's say you're a shop that has a credit card. You want to promote this credit card offering to certain kinds of customers. Maybe you're going to offer something to recent university graduates, right? So you can determine what that promotion looks like based on what you know from other data sources of who's coming to your website. You can tailor that offering to that audience. You might have a different offering for a different customer segment, for example, but you can easily then swap out which elements go into what the specific offering is. But that kind of container for the promotional credit card offer is easily replicable. And so that's interesting to me, because what that means is that the customer facing teams, the revenue teams, can really think about what are the kinds of promotions that they want to run, why do they want to run them to certain customer segments, and what the appropriate offering is for those customer segments. Because it becomes really easy to experiment. It becomes really quick to roll that stuff out, and you can begin to see an impact really, really quickly. And that's the kind of thing that, in a sense, we're making the execution really easy, because you've got all the content elements that go into that. You've got the terms and conditions, you've got the details of the offer, you've got the images that go into the banner, you've got the text on the promotion, you've got all of that stuff within the system. It becomes easy to compose that and easy to swap out the details of what go into each of those pieces. But the business team is then free to think about what are the right promotions to the right audiences, what's going to drive the most revenue, what are the experiments they need to set up to figure that out, rather than trying to set up the promotion in the system.
Right, as long as it's simple enough that the system isn't getting in the way of the people trying to do the job. That's
Exactly.
simple enough, yeah.
Yeah.
Would it be a splendid and fantastic opportunity, knowing that you have a governmental background as well, with one of the larger hardware players, to touch base with these gentlemen and ladies, as one has the impression that citizen relationship management is an underdevelopment or an underdeveloped territory. It's like I'm seeing to a completely blank card of opportunities. And that would be, for me, incredible, from the telefax machine to something really sexy. Yeah, that would be leapfrogging. That's speaking for Germany. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that starting to happen too, and it's been interesting because, the COVID-19 pandemic has driven a lot of that. There was a tremendous amount of demand for information. I mean, I can't remember who it was, whether it was Marshall or Thomas, talking about this idea of knowledge bases. But that has been a key driver of really good content management and content strategies, and the need for better tools to help to stand that up quickly, to manage what goes into that, and to ensure it's timely and accurate, to ensure that you've got the ability to take it down when it isn't anymore, when it's been superseded by something else. I think we've seen a lot of that in the public sector to some degree, certainly in a lot of healthcare organizations that sort of sit in that somewhere between the private sector and the public sector. There's been a lot of emphasis on better engagement through better information. And I think that speaks to exactly what you're talking about, Ralph.
I think there you could be really delivering little miracles. Yeah, because what I saw, I'm a typical boy, typical techie. So the first case study was jumped into my face was Bang & Olufsen. I was getting nearly crazy. How did you help that organization? So I had the time to read it carefully, but I was impressed, because these guys do not go easy with somebody who they do not think is giving them real fun. Yeah.
Which organization was that again, Ralph? I didn't quite catch that.
I went to your website, and Bang & Olufsen, as one of the loudspeaker and headset makers, that is something bing, bing, that rings a bell for me as a boy with his toys.
Oh, yes. Yeah. The ultimate toys, the nice, expensive, shiny ones. Yeah. Well, I think what Bang & Olufsen was really trying to do was create a luxury online buying experience that really had an equivalent feel to what going into their stores is like. And we helped them by understanding, which aspects of what they were selling and how they were presenting that information to their customers they really needed to manage effectively in order to create that kind of luxury experience. And it's been really quite successful for them. They've certainly seen an increase in sales through their digital channels as a result. And I suspect that's been a very timely thing over the last 2 years as well. But it's fun to be part of a story like that as well, because Bang & Olufsen is hardly a net native company, right? I mean, as much as they are absolutely, and for their entire history have been leading technology providers, it hasn't been internet technology. They've been selling physical goods.
Yeah.
They've been doing it for a long time. So it's really kind of interesting to be part of a transformation that has been going on in an organization that has a really long history, but also has a long history of kind of being an innovator. So it's a different kind of innovation for them in the way that they go to market.
And now just simply do the silly salespeople approach. I would go for Sennheiser, I would go for Epos, I would go for Bose, I would go for GBL and ring the bell.
We did it for them, we can do it for you. Yeah.
That sounds really fascinating. And you said it does need some, let's say, sense to get the case done and to create it. I was in my little chamber asking myself how it is not only accompanying the customer journey, but it is helping at one of the little dreams a male has. Just save time by pushing a button and the customer gets exactly the information he is looking for. Yeah? By the artificial intelligence or whatsoever, what is helping me there? How do you combine AI aspects and getting the right content to the right person at the right time on the right channel? Chaka chaka.
Yeah, please give us the George Jetson 15-minute workday.
Exactly. Wouldn't that be nice? I don't know about you guys, but my workday seems to keep getting longer instead of shorter.
Yeah.
I don't know what we're doing wrong, but all this information, all these different tools, it's not leading to less work, at least not yet. I'm open to tips on that, by the way. Anyone want to offer me some? Let me know. But it may amuse you to know that we aren't directly doing a lot with artificial intelligence ourselves. And part of the reason for that is I go back to this idea of the ecosystem. I don't rule out that we would move into that space at some point, and I don't have any privileged information there, so I'm not sharing any state secrets. But we do see that there's a tremendous potential to use AI and machine learning particularly in a variety of different ways to serve up content. At the moment, we feel like the best way to do that is through partners. And part of the reason is I go back to a sophisticated solution to a sophisticated problem. We have so many different kinds of customers that are really trying to do distinctive things along these lines that it seems more appropriate to allow them to make the decision about what type of AI tool they want to use and how they want to apply it, and to use our content platform to feed into that decision-making process. And so far that seems to be working. We certainly have a lot of customers that are moving into that realm, and it's closely tied to analytics as well, right? Understanding what types of content play well under what circumstances. How can you identify that better? And how can that feed back into the way that you devise and create the content that you're using in the first place?
Totally different line of thought, so I might have missed it out for some reason. But why is headless a thing for content management systems?
I think it really has to do with history more than anything else. I mean, if you go back to, we could go back to newspapers if we really want to get old school, typesetting.
Look at my passport. I am old school.
I know. We don't have to go quite back as far as the typesetting days. But if you think about how all of these digital channels have emerged, content management was really intimately tied to each of these things. So Dreamweaver, anyone? You want to go back to the old days of developing websites? I mean, the content management was really baked into the system, right? And that was how it worked. And at the time, that actually was totally fine. Partly because it was already a big enough mental leap to get to understanding what we were actually trying to do, how to think about it, the way it was organized, what we were presenting. Then we got into things like search engine optimization and writing differently for the websites than we would write under normal circumstances. I'm still struggling a little bit with that one, but these things are sort of mindset changes, they're cultural changes that happen over some period of time. Yeah. And as we've had this proliferation of channels, especially over the last, decade or so, even less in some cases, there's just been this explosion in different places where content goes. And what's tended to happen is there's been a different system, and sometimes even multiple systems, for managing each of those channels. So that's really been history. And that's why this whole move toward headless, and I want to be clear, headless is a means to an end. It is not an end point or an end objective in and of itself. It's a way of doing something, and it's a way of trying to, it's a way of trying to abstract these things, so that it's easier to think about what you're saying through any channel and divide that into pieces that you can reuse and leverage across those channels, as opposed to having to have a separate tool, a separate system for managing all of that stuff and effectively replicating all of that content across every channel in which you're trying to use it. Just as a sort of interesting bit of trivia or observation, I talked about this being a sort of mindset change and something that happens over time. We see very frequently that customers that move to Contentful end up taking a lot of the vestiges of the way they used to do things and putting that into the content models that they create initially. And so there's often part of the process that happens several months into using Contentful, where you kind of need to go back to the basics and rethink how you've defined these different content elements or types, because you might realize that either you were overly complicated or you had duplicated stuff that you didn't need to duplicate. And you need to go back and revise that in order to shift the way you're working, but also adapt better to some of those ways of working as well.
Absolutely.
So you have, sorry, Marshall.
No, I was just going to say that anybody who has studied the French Revolution knows that headless is a means to an end and not an end in itself.
Not an end in itself. It's a dead end if you're not careful, but yeah.
Well, you gave us another view of getting headless, and that explanation you gave us was the most plausible I had, and I will memorize. Thank you for that one. And the other aspect is that having it from the perspective that it's helping and combining what you can make easier is good. But you are also very sensible on the topic of data quality, such as if you have rotten data, you can't deliver cool content. Yeah.
Not in a personalized way, no. And it's interesting because this is a conversation I've had internally with several of my colleagues recently, and looking at what our customers are trying to do, because really your ability as a business to do any type of personalization is directly dependent on the quality and increasingly the volume of data that you have to work with.
Okay.
So
that's an important one.
Yes, absolutely. And I will say again, for the record, yes, the quantitative data is actually really important, but it alone does not answer those questions. It's the qualitative insights that you have about your customers and what they're trying to do that gives you the context that makes it easier to interpret that quantitative data and determine then what you should do with it. What type of personalization that should drive. What is the actual context? What's the motivator on the customer side that makes it easier to design that experience and to present the appropriate content in order to help facilitate that. It's the boring, hard work part, right? I mean, there's got to be some thinking to go into this.
That is why we want to have Joe Jetson help us a bit, and we would appreciate if, for instance, Carsten's inspiring moments from Market Logic come with some helping hands and how to get here some new aspects inside in some time. But honest, I'm very proud that you mentioned we are not as fast in AI. You prefer human intelligence at that stage. And I love that one, such as a committed partner with some sense for what the customer is really needing and helping him with his expertise is honestly speaking, much often better than some crappy stuff out of the box, which is coming from a computer.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we've got one customer who's actually presenting a session at our Fast Forward conference next week, talking about personalization at Staples Canada. And they ultimately have a goal, and I'm happy to debate with them whether they should ever really try to make it this far or not. I'm sure you guys will be enjoying that debate. They ultimately want to get to individual level personalization, but what they figured out is they can do an awful lot without getting anywhere close to that, just on what they call kind of big bucket segmentation. So they've got consumer customers and they have business customers. And they've got two types of business customers. They have the small businesses and they have the larger businesses. And what they've been able to do, even without additional tools, is use Contentful in such a way that they can identify, someone self-identifies when they go onto the website, which category they're in, which big bucket segment they're in. And that customer signal that is very straightforward determines what banner advertisement they're shown on the website. And it sounds very basic and straightforward, and in a lot of ways it is, but you know what? It's really effective. So they've seen a significant increase in click-through and conversion rates as a result of that. So not all of this has to be really, really detailed multivariate problems to get to personalization. Sometimes the really simple, straightforward stuff is what is most effective. And it's certainly starting with that is a much better bet than jumping straight to high degrees of complexity.
I think it's a matter of crawl, walk, run, right? Or walk, fly, go to space. So
absolutely.
there's no point in going for the ultimate objective right away if you don't have the preparations, the setup for doing the simpler things, right? And that's basically what I found interesting in your statements before, is that you probably are now about to get the eternal wrath of our colleague Esteban, who wanted to get away from this B2 something stuff.
This was exactly my idea.
Which is an interesting question in itself. So in how far does a CMS, a content management system, support in solving, using the same or basically the same content or very similar content for simple to more complex scenarios in looking at different journeys?
Well, I think it's a somewhat complex answer. I think a lot of it comes down to, this is really the hard work of content management. Is part of it is the content strategy. What are your needs and preferences as a business? What are your customers' preferences and priorities? How do you match the two up effectively? And this is the debate I always have with Esteban. No business is altruistic. We're in business to make money, but we want to do it by virtue of serving our customers' needs really effectively. And that's one part of how you do it, right? But having that content strategy to understand what you're trying to do and therefore what content you need in order to match that combination. Content operations to make sure that the right things are happening at the right points along the way, from creation to composition to orchestration to deployment, all of the technical aspects of making that work. There's a big part as well, and this is an area that I personally find fascinating, which is how do you think about content in this way? So I consider this a mental model or a content framework, and how does that translate into the actual content model that you create in the system? And it's funny because I notice a lot of analysts that talk about things like atomic level content. Well, if we're going to take a chemistry analogy here, I think an atomic level is just way too small, right? What we're really talking about is molecules and compounds, and realizing that sometimes we want to deal with individual molecules, and sometimes we really want some complex compounds of things. And I think that's where we're trying to go with content modeling, is how do you understand the right scale on which to define those content types, and that not all of them will be the same. And how do you then take different content types and compose them into elements that have some subcomponents that you can, again, manage independently, but you can also manage them collectively as well. So like to my example earlier of, a credit card promotion, there are a whole lot of elements that can be managed independently that are content types, but you have that content element that you can pull together that allows you to, very quickly chop and change and decide where you're going to present option A or option B, for example. And, it does get somewhat mechanistic, but that's part of the point. How do we ultimately boil down the big ideas of what we're trying to convey to the world into these pieces that we can actually manage and execute on, and that we can manage the life cycle of over time as well.
And without having to recreate them from scratch every time. That's the big trick. Well, it's not that big a trick, but it's something that is often forgotten.
It is. And that I would argue is the complex and challenging part of this. And certainly what we see and what I've been fascinated to observe among our customers is that is an evolution, and that's not static. So actually defining that model is something that is rarely going to happen once and you just put it in place and forget about it. Like that, the evolution of that model is as much a part of how the business is changing as what channels you use, what the creative is that you come up with, what the actual messages are. All of this is actually evolving. So that actually becomes a really critical question when you look at where you want to make investments, because I would argue you don't want to be locked into one model for doing this. You want to have some flexibility in the model. So you need a platform that endures, but you need the flexibility to adapt within that platform as needs dictate.
That begs the question, what is the right granularity? What's the right molecule?
Well, come on, like this is the thing we've been debating for ages. Object-oriented application development had exactly the same set of challenges, right? This is not a new question. And I think part of the challenge is there's not one answer. There's not even one answer within a single organization. So, yes.
Let's just look at it. On one side, we have the same piece of information, the same document, or the same paragraph, chapter, sentence, even if you want, is helpful as a user documentation. It's helpful as sales and marketing collateral. It's helpful for service and support.
Yep.
It's helpful if you're putting it on the website as a part of maybe an account-based, as a landing page for an account-based marketing approach campaign. Yeah, just that it needs to be embedded differently.
Yes.
So, and the real work where I believe that systems and CMSs can take away part of the mundane work is recombining it appropriately. So, but that gives has as a precondition the size of the molecule, or the atom, whatever an atom is.
I think molecules work a little better if we're starting to deal with at an atomic level. We're dealing with free radicals. That becomes extremely complicated to deal with. But no, I think you're right, and as I say, so I think of it in terms of, it's the call out quote, and it's the call out quote in a document. As you say, it might be in different contexts. It might be the tweet as well. So you begin to see where this extensibility really comes in. And part of this is like, that's not necessarily how it's generated in the first place. I don't, as an analyst, I didn't write my reports by starting with the call out quotes, So there's another interesting aspect of this to me, which is how does the creative process actually connect into the content process and the content life cycle? Because there's still a bit of a disconnect there, and I think there to some degree always will be. But part of this is, what is the starting point? How do you break it down into the appropriate elements? How do you use those elements to compose and recombine and recreate or create? And what is the relationship between these things? And I think the answer is there's not one linear process. So that, again, adds to some of the complexity. It adds to some of the fun. And it also confirms for me that as many wonderful tools as we get. And we certainly as a company are invested in making tools that are easier and easier to get to this, really critical thinking part of the job. Make the basic stuff easy, make it automatic even in a lot of cases, but there's still going to be a tremendous amount of this job that is always about critical thinking, because you can't ever automate that.
And I think critical thinking is what gets all of us up in the morning. We don't just want to go from point A to point B. Everyone here, and I think most of our audience, we're thinkers. I mean, we're also doers. Most of us anyway. I don't like doing things. But we like complex problems.
We do.
We like to push our way through them with our brains. And, the technology we use isn't about eliminating complexity. It's about making it manageable. And it seems to me that that's what Contentful is doing and what you're helping them do. And, well, damn, I love it.
I'm glad. I do too. It's one reason why I'm so happy being here.
It's a good thing they hired you then.
All around,
and they pay you. That's beautiful.
I know. But it is interesting, Marshall. I think you're picking up on something that is actually a really, really important thread in this whole area, which is complexity and managing complexity. You can never eliminate complexity. You can only push it to different places, and you can abstract away from it. And part of the challenge of abstracting away from complexity is that sometimes you eliminate options that you need. And I think the constant challenge is how to put complexity in the right place, how to abstract in the right ways so that you aren't losing the nuance, but you are making it easy to focus your efforts and attention on the things that really are the important choices, the important decisions, the important thought processes that actually drive the most important value.
In how far do you think it's content management versus knowledge management?
I think increasingly that is a very blurry line. And it's interesting because I was just talking about this earlier today. We actually have a lot of customers that use Contentful as a platform for knowledge bases, knowledge management, as much as they do for content, for externally facing content. And if you take an example like Lyft, sometimes that line is really sort of hard to draw because they use us to help communicate and provide information to their drivers, for example, through the Lyft app. So, I mean, okay, there's a bigger debate about whether drivers are actually employees or not. We won't get into that here. But it is interesting because that is actually a knowledge base. That's not customer-facing content. That is knowledge management internally. You have exactly the same challenges. Which channel do you present it in? How do you provide that context? Which elements do you present where and when? And how do you define what you present based on what the needs of the audience really is? So pretty much pretty similar, I'd argue. We tend to have divided up how we do this within companies, sometimes for good reasons and sometimes not so much. But I think this is another example of where our lives as consumers are increasingly influencing our lives as employees as well, because the expectations we have for the types of experiences that are created, shaped for us, the way we find information as consumers, we expect it to be that easy and straightforward in our employee lives as well.
Well, we just found a spam content.
Spam
comment, which made it into content.
It means we're coming up in the world. We're being noticed by the bots.
Yeah.
Dear, oh dear.
The interesting aspect is that some of the content we would have shown a bit earlier if they would have come through, because we have had some linking problems with some of the Facebook accounts. We would have thrown in some of the friendly words from Raymond Gerber and from Winfried Felser. But
Hi, guys.
genau, Aloha.
I was already
So
wondering why I see Ralph commenting on Winfried and
There we
Wade.
go. Now we know. Now we know.
Yeah.
Well, in
this,
the interest of good content too, I'm going to make an admission here, which is that I had a little bit of a Freudian slip earlier, and I had just seen that my good friend Steve Smith has a new job, and it's not CEO of Contentful. So CEO of Contentful, Steve Sloan. Just in case anybody wanted their trivia for the day, how I messed up in the CRMKonvos conversation.
yeah, well, we are not looking for that, but this makes us so authentic. This makes us so lovable, and we are real humans, and we have fun in what we do. Yeah,
We do. Yeah, we absolutely do.
And so names are important at a certain time, not always. Yeah. The smile behind it, that you have a picture in front of you on your, let's say, cinema in the hat, such as he's the guy who makes the things run and gives a good feeling to a lot of other ladies and gentlemen in that organization. That is the cool thing. Yeah. And that he is a trusted guy with the customers when he signs off the contracts and the friendly handshake, even it's virtual in these days. But the complete organization, if they have such a fun as you have it, and you are telling about your company, what you are delivering and what you can do for your customers and their customers, it's overwhelming positive.
Yep.
I'm glad you guys think so. I mean, as I say, I came here because I really think our mission is a worthy one, and I think we're doing some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited to be a part of it and to see how it continues to grow and evolve. Because hey, it's all about the substance, right? And that's really what we're working with.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it's great.
And we
I
probably
realize. Sorry.
We probably should do a sequel with Dina, you, and Ray on how content and journeys go together.
Oh, that would be fun.
That'll be real fun, I think, because well, somehow we are not doing content just to have it. we have an objective.
Hey, Folio, a big partner of ours, by the way.
Yeah.
Just gonna say, yeah.
Good. Makes it even better.
It does, and a customer. So I think that goes both ways, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, make yourself mutual customers.
I realize we need to be respectful of your time. We are at the hour. And we're actually a few minutes past. But you did mention Contentful has a conference next week. Would that be a good place to close this? Anything you want to say about that before we kick you out?
Absolutely. And I should have come armed with the link to register because, of course, it's free because it's still virtual. But yes, next week is our Fast Forward Customer Conference. And honestly, there's a bunch of really good stuff. You can hear Steve Sloan, our actual CEO, talking, as well as some of our other big execs, and a lot of our customers too. And I honestly highly recommend the customer sessions because there's a lot of really cool stuff going on.
That
requires
they're
much better at telling
a
us
registration link.
Yeah, I know. If only I had the registration link.
And what's also very important to let people and audience know is that your community edition is as powerful as it is, completely free of charge.
It is. It is indeed.
So I did the sales pitch for you in this case. So you are not harmed. I, as the analyst, said it, and not the evangelist without the wings.
Or Halo. No, it's true. It is, and it will always be free. That's the plan. But lots of different tiers, lots of opportunities to play around and experiment, and that's really the goal.
So let's copy towards the end of it. Let's copy this link into the open chat.
Tara, dann Schuss.
Okay.
Well done, gentlemen.
Join us, please. It'll be fun.
Yeah, it will be fun. Okay, so acknowledging your need to run.
Jump.
I'm gonna go.
We probably
Thank you
don't
all.
hold you too long anymore. Thanks for being
It's
there.
been great talking to all of you. I've missed you guys. It's been great to see you, and I look forward to talking again soon.
Always a pleasure, Nicole.
Always
Thanks
a
for coming
pleasure
by.
talking to
Thanks
you.
all.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you very
See you
much.
then. Bye, and we are going backstage as well. So thanks for everybody who was there. Thanks to everybody.